blessing it is to be able to assemble together, open our Bibles, and study from God's Word. And thankfully, the rain has held off, at least for us to be here this morning. Hopefully after service as well, and maybe even this afternoon at 4, whatever the case be. Thankfully, God is watching over us. And a couple of things I want to begin with. First of all, James and Donna Scott, last Sunday afternoon, right after service, actually, we had a word of prayer. They want to work and worship with us here at Radnor. We had a word of prayer. Appreciate them so very, very much, and appreciate Melissa putting this in the bulletin. Son and daughter-in-law of Brenda Wells, and certainly are thankful so much for them. Thankful for Melissa. I had this Wednesday evening. I write down notes, and I failed to look at my notes, but she does such an excellent job in the bulletin, and I particularly found this article so relevant to our study. A lot of times I don't really look in depth at the bulletin until maybe Sunday night after service or even Monday because of time's sake. But the last couple of lessons with Deborah and JL, particularly like this, that she put in the bulletin last week. Some women make a fool out of a man, but many a godly woman has made a man out of a fool. I thought that was so true. Your influence is endless, really. And it continues on, our influence, long after we've departed from this world. So never think that you're not making a difference. You are. You may not be able to see it immediately. You may not even see it in your lifetime, but you're making an influence. You're leaving an impact on this world, and we choose whether that's a good impact or sort of a negative one. We want to leave a good one. Our study is in the book of Judges, and this book really is important for us today because if we look in our world, we're going to be able to see that a lot of the things that happened back then are still happening today. Those that will walk with and serve God will be blessed. And we see that as long as the Israelite nation did exactly what God commanded, let me say this one more time, as long as the Israelite nation did exactly as God commanded, they were what? All right, protected. Give me another word. That's true. Blessed. I mean, they were good, faithful, strong, weren't they? As long as they did what God said to do. Keep that in mind. Are you doing exactly what God has commanded? And if not, then, I think sometimes when we experience problems in our life, we look in so many different directions, but one of the first that we need to look at is, am I serving God? Am I doing what God? That doesn't mean you're not going to have problems, but if you're serving God, you can eliminate that right off the bat, can't you? Remember the friends of Job? They kept thinking, he evidently is not doing what God commands. Yes, he was. But you can start right there. But this lesson is relevant because as long as they followed God, and we're going to see in our lesson this morning, they had a period of how many years were they faithful? 40. They were 40 years they were faithful, and then after losing their faithfulness, how long did they experience some struggles and difficulty? I think about that, and I think 7 years. That's a long time, isn't it? To be hiding in hills and mountains and cliffs, and to be just straggling around trying to find food and nourishment. 7 years. It's a long time, isn't it? That's what we say, and it's true. You know, I've heard one generation is about 40 years. In other words, if you're not teaching your children diligently, then they're not going to know. They're not going to be able to instill that in their children, so it's going to be gone. And it's scary, isn't it? Very scary. You have to, you can't make the assumption. And, you know, sometimes I fail because I make a lot of assumptions. You know, I thought for the longest everybody ought to be able to mind. You know, I don't communicate it too well. Surely you can know what's going on in here without me telling you. No, it doesn't happen, does it? So you have to really communicate and make sure that you're communicating. Make sure that this person understands. Again, don't just assume because you have, you know, presented it that it's being grasped. It has to be really, you know, repetitive, doesn't it? Over and over and over again. And they failed. And it cost them greatly. All right, so now, after these 7 years, this is what our reading is going to be about. After these 7 years, now finally they have, you know, seen the light. We've got one option. We probably have tried everything else. Turn back to God. Should have been their first choice. Should have been their first decision, but it wasn't. A lot of times people really do have to get down there to the very pits of pain and suffering before they turn back to God. And that's what's happened here. They're turning back to God. This lesson next week about Gideon against the Midianites and the Amalekites and the people of the east. So beginning on page 61, we're on lesson 6. It's sort of a lengthy reading, and I may just stop this reading to sort of look at some things. We've already pointed out some of these. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. And because of that, they suffered. So the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years. And the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel because of the Midianites. The children of Israel made for themselves the dens and the caves and the strongholds which are in the mountains. It really is a pitiful sight, you know, to picture in your mind of what they were doing. You think about how blessed we are. We are blessed. God's blessed us for a long time, but talking a little bit earlier, you wonder how long will those blessings continue when people turn so far away from Him. And even in our generation, we've seen this, haven't we? With the laws that are being made and with the mindset of so many people, and you wonder how long. And hopefully things will turn around. One thing's for certain, we can't give up and we can't quit. But we have to understand that people are ultimately going to reap what they sow, aren't they? So it was, verse 3, whenever Israel had sown, the Midianites would come up. Also the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. I mean, this is like free, you know, provisions. I mean, they're slaves, aren't they? The people of Israel. Then they would encamp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep nor ox nor donkey. For they would come up with their livestock and their tents, coming in as numerous as locusts. Both they and their camels were without number, and they would enter the land to destroy it. So Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel, here's finally what happened. They cried out to the Lord. Now, it should have been their first. They shouldn't have gotten to that point in life, but they did. Now, next reading here. The angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon, Joash, father of Gideon, threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, and notice his response, notice these words in verse 12 on page 62. The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor. And you can sort of anticipate the response of Gideon, can't you? Gideon said to him, "Oh, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hand of the Midianites." I mean, you really do understand, don't you? Have you ever felt like that? Where's God? Well, why is all this happening? Doing everything that He's said for me to do. They hadn't. But sometimes we do. It rains on the just and on the unjust, doesn't it? It's kind of hard sometimes to accept the fact that this is not our eternal resting place. That we have a home in heaven that's not prepared with hands, one that's eternal, don't we? Where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about? Did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites. Then the Lord turned to him and said, "Go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you?" So he said to him, "Oh, my Lord, how can I save Israel?" Isn't it amazing? You look here at Gideon. Do you remember anyone else that had trouble initially accepting the trust that God would place in them? Who else had trouble? Very similar words to what Gideon is saying here. All right, Job struggled, didn't he? Time and time again, Job did. He was doing everything that he was commanded to do. And I think about Moses too. Who am I? Who am I to go to Pharaoh? I think that's the mindset that often we have. Pardon me? Without Deborah, would he? Needed some support, encouragement. I mean, a lot of times we look and we question ourselves. I mean, I think we all pretty well look average. Maybe that would be a better word. We're not leaders of corporations. We're not, politically elevated to a position where we have a lot of control and power. We probably look around and say, who are we? Who am I? Well, we're children of God. With God's help, what is impossible? Nothing, is it? And so we need to leave that mindset that, it's not us. Gideon needed to understand it wasn't him. Barak, that we just needed to understand it wasn't him. Moses needed to understand it's not him. It's what God can do through his people. All right, so for time's sake, Gideon needed a sign, didn't he? And I think it was so understanding of God to provide that sign for him. He didn't have to, did he? God says, this is what you are to do. That's what we are to do. But he's long-suffering to us. He really is. And he provided Gideon with this sign. And he's going to need other signs as well. Later we're going to see. So look over here on page 63. Introduction. After God delivered Israel from the Canaanite oppression by the hands of Deborah, Barak, and Jael, the land had rest for 40 days. And we've sort of already touched on that. Times of comfort, times of peace, times of plenty, that they sometimes can subtly allow us to just day by day just gradually get a little bit farther and a little bit farther away from God until one day we're completely separated. You know, we often talk about a little piece of coal or a fire ember that's separated from the fire. It doesn't take long for it to cool off. That's what happened. A period of 40 years, blink of an eye, isn't it? Really not that long. And you can see what would happen. Thankfully, found themselves hiding, scavenging, trying to get by. They turn back to God. And God seeks out this man by the name of Gideon. Distant relatives, the introduction tells us here. Bottom of page 63, the encroachment of Midian on Israel in our lesson text involved not only terrorizing the Israelites, but also raiding the land and removing available food. Midianites looted Israel's harvest and scattered its inhabitants. They were really just very cruel, and that's one of the things that's been mentioned, but we sort of with Deborah in that song that we looked at last week. Very cruel, inhumane, and again, you don't want to find out how wicked people can be. We can see. And we want to make sure that, we live our life, try to, elect officials that's going to help us to live our life close to God. Look at the next page, top of page 64. It says they were like locusts. Their innumerable hosts devoured every green plant in sight, leaving the land devastated with nothing left over for the Israelite flocks and herds. And Gideon, middle of the page there, was threshing wheat in a wine press when the angel of the Lord said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." And no doubt, as the writer mentioned here, Gideon was just dumbfounded that anyone could think, someone in that position that he was in could have any effect on anyone. But he did ultimately, didn't he? Remember that. It doesn't matter who you are. You have an influence. You have a purpose. You have a place where you're needed. And don't take it lightly. And no one else can take your place. The Lord did, as Gideon, toward the bottom of page 64, requested, and he provided a sign. Top of the next page, page 65. Although it's easy to criticize Gideon for his fear, to me, I don't know if I would equate it to fear. Cautious, maybe hard to see, wasn't it? I think just like so many of us, hard to see how we can make any difference. I think Gideon, if he had really understood that it was possible, would have jumped at the opportunity, but he just couldn't see. I think that's where so many people are. I just can't see making a difference in my family. I really can't see making a difference in the workplace. Just can't see making a difference in my neighborhood. And that's sort of like what Gideon was. Drop down just a little bit more, still toward the top of page 65 here. Israel's faithfulness to God departed with one generation. And another generation arose who either did not know God or did not live as if they did. That's sort of, where it seems things head, doesn't it? And it can be scary. In other words, the Israelites, drop down right under verse 2 there, were forced to run to the hills for their own protection. And they finally turned back to God, didn't they? Look at the next page over here. Finally, this is toward the top there. The appearance of the Amalekites is ironic, for Moses had instructed Israel. What had Moses instructed Israel? To do what? Get rid of them, didn't he? To kill them. God, through Moses, had instructed him to convey to them, this is what you are to do. You start up here at God, and you start down, and you can see where any deviation from what God has commanded, no matter how slight it may seem in the eyes of man. It was just a little thing. It's just fire. Nadab and Abihu. It's just reaching out to touch and steady the cart that's holding the Ark of the Covenant. It's just a little deviation, but it's not, is it? And you're looking again in our world today, and so many people say, it's just the Lord's Supper. Let's just take it quarterly or yearly, or it's just baptism, or it's just singing or instrumental music. Not that big of a deal. We can change. We can add to it. We can leave it out. And it's not going to matter. Well, mattered to God, didn't it? Mattered to God when they began to deviate from what he commanded. And they found themselves hiding, fleeing, eating anything and whatever they could possibly find. And so that's the reason why we try to instill into ourselves, to remind ourselves of how important it is to follow what God's commanded. All right, so Gideon is chosen, bottom of page 66. as had occurred in other instances during the period of Judges, God selected an individual to help his people. In this case, Israel's future deliverer was threshing wheat in a wine press to avoid the attention of the Midianites. And when you look at the top of the next page, who has God chosen? He's from what kind of tribe? What kind of people? Right? Weakest. And in his family, he was who? Right? You know, didn't stand out, did he? Didn't look like a future deliverer, did he? You know, that's important. You know, we place so much importance on, let's get a person that's going to fit the bill, our perception of things. And we remember when David was chosen as king of Israel, he didn't look the part, did he? God doesn't look at the outward, he looks at the inward, doesn't he? That's important. Despite, top of page 67, Gideon's background, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, mighty man of valor." And Gideon's hiding from the Midianites. He's threshing wheat in a wine press. His name here, the writer points out, means hacker. But Gideon is characterized by fearfulness and reluctance. He just didn't see himself as capable of serving God to this degree. We're very good, aren't we, about putting limitations on ourselves and not allowing God to work us. And so he wanted that sign. Oh, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened? You know, he was expecting, wanting those miracles that he'd heard of, that he had read about, and he wasn't seeing them, was he? The people were being punished, page 67, because of their disobedience. But God was offering them another change, another opportunity, another chance, really. All right, the sign. Over on page 68, despite God's affirmation that Gideon was his chosen deliverer for Israel, Gideon remained skeptical. Wanting to remove any doubts about his role, he requested, give me a sign. If I found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who talk with me. And, it just didn't make sense to Gideon. It's like, well, a mistake has been made. Maybe an honest mistake, but nevertheless a mistake. You've chosen the wrong one. But you don't know who I am. Yes, God does know who we are and what we're capable of. And he received that confirmation that he sought after. He brought an offering to the angel of the Lord, and certainly we see the power of God in fulfilling that promise to deliver a sign. Top of page 69. Now Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. So Gideon said, "Alas, O Lord God, for I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face." Then the Lord said to him, "Peace be with you." Do you notice the tremendous change in Gideon? He understands. He sees. He believes, doesn't he? How how strong is, our faith? Do you believe? Do you really believe? He did. Faith can replace a lot of fears, can't it? If we will allow it to. And that's what we see with Gideon. Look at the applications here. And how true this first one is. It's easy to blame our problems on others. Israel likely wanted to blame their pitiable condition on the oppressive Midianites. It's the Midianites. It's they're the reason we're suffering. No, it wasn't the Midianites, was it? Gideon attempted to blame God for not acting on behalf of his people. Nevertheless, the difficulties Israel faced, what were they? A result of their own wickedness. That's the reason I said at the beginning of our lesson, I think we need to really look at our life and make sure that, we've not strayed away from God. That doesn't mean that we're going to have perfect, sinless lives, but if we've deviated, then sin has entered in willfully, and that's going to create a problem, isn't it? That's what had happened with them. The difficulties were because of their own wickedness. When they departed from God, they were punished. Why? Because God loves us. Because God loved them. Had He not interceded and chastened them for their actions, do you think they would have returned? No, they wouldn't have. The things that happen, sort of like, Joseph, when he's talking to his brothers, you meant it for evil. All of these things that have happened in my life, you selling me to the Midianite merchantmen, Pharaoh's wife lying against me, all of these things, God meant for what? Good. To come about this day, to be in this position. They were in a place that wasn't welcome, but they were there for a reason, for a purpose, because they'd sinned. But all was not lost, was it? And you look at Judges chapter 6, verse 10. This is still under the applications here. I am the Lord your God. Do not fear the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but you've not obeyed my voice. Isn't it comforting to know that no matter where we are, no matter what the situation, that God is God? We can still serve Him. No matter what the rest of the world may or may not do, we can still serve God. Next application here. Although it's easy to criticize Gideon for his lack of courage, the text does not do so. He was chosen because God saw something in him that He did not see in himself. Again, I hope you read that a couple of times, and maybe even underline that. God saw something in himself that God saw something in him, that He didn't see in himself. God saw it. You may not see what you're capable of, but God does. How thankful we should be for the God who looks beneath the surface and knows our potentials. He really does. All right, let's look at the discussion questions. We won't answer all of these, but at least turn to the discussion questions on page 71. What can we learn from this passage about how God views his children? How does God see us? How does God see you? How does God see me? He what? All right, he does it. He doesn't see through my eyes. I'm glad. You know, sometimes I don't see the best in people. Sometimes I don't see the best in myself. Sometimes we look for faults, don't we? Sometimes we look for the negative. God sees potential. You know, that's a gift, isn't it? To be able to look for the best in someone. He loves us. God loves his children. He sacrificed for us. You know, greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Jesus has given his life for us. He sacrificed, didn't he? He's willing to forgive. Just think about how enormous that is, to forgive and to forget. All right, the second one, why do we sometimes refuse to accept blame for our action? Oh, isn't it easier to blame someone else? I mean, you know, you look back in the Garden of Eden, you know, the woman that you made, she gave me to eat and I ate there. It's her fault. And of course with Eve, you know, the serpent beguiled me. It's easy to blame someone else, isn't it? Man, that's the world that we're living in, isn't it? That no one wants to stand up and say, you know, I sinned. I made a mistake. It's easier, isn't it? What steps can we take to avoid blaming others for our own failures? Very good, Brother Melvin. I had to look at myself and I have to say, you know, I made a mistake. I'm guilty. I didn't have to do this. No one forced me to do this. I willingly chose to do this. I'm accountable. And, you know, God's going to hold us accountable. On the day of judgment, I'm not going to be able to say, you know, that Aubrey fellow, he's the one that you ought to be looking at. He's the one that caused me to be the way I am. No, he didn't. And we're not going to be able to say that about anyone. We're going to have to give an account for the things that we've done in our body according to what we've done, whether it's good or bad, aren't we? And number three, what can Christians do today when they are uncertain about the direction they should go in their lives? You know, what is it that they often do? You know, I see people that will talk, and I've said this before, they'll talk to their friends, their co-workers, they'll talk to total strangers. What should I do? What do I need to do? Instead of talking to God, instead of seeking direction from his word, they go anywhere, even Christians. They go anywhere and everywhere except where they should, to turn to God, to seek help from godly brothers and sisters in Christ, but to seek God's help, to seek God's direction in life. All right, so Gideon is chosen. The Midianites, the Amalekites, the people of the east, they have been a pain to Israel. 7 years they've suffered. They finally cried out to the Lord. Gideon is going to be the leader. We continue on next week as we see Gideon still. Gideon, you know, you don't immediately sort of jump into that position that you don't feel you're qualified for. So Gideon's still going to be a little bit skeptical next week. Study, and if you have any questions, comments, please always feel free to make those.